Canadians go to the polls on Monday, October 19th to decide Canada's future. One of those candidates in this year's election for a seat in the House of Commons in Ottawa is Ralph Goodale, MP, is running in Wisconsin, Saskatchewan. Mr. Goodale joins us on the show this afternoon. Sir, how is the election campaign going so far?
Well, it's going very well. We're only barely into it. We're about 3 weeks into the campaign. Normally, you'd be halfway done by now. But this is a very long one, 11 weeks in total, but it's going very well.
Last week, Justin Trudeau announced his plans for First Nations education and opportunity. Let's dig in deeper into that. Tell us about that plan.
Well, he was in northern Saskatchewan meeting with Aboriginal leaders in various communities and also in Regina and in Saskatoon. And he made a truly transformative announcement about access to Indigenous education. Transformative in two senses. First of all, from a social policy point of view, this is the beginning of trying to bridge some of the life gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. From a social policy perspective, those gaps are huge. They have lasted for a very long time. They are unconscionable in terms of public policy. They need to be filled. This is the beginning of that process. So it's good social policy. More importantly, it is also good economic policy because it will be engaging and mobilizing and empowering the youngest and the fastest growing segment of Canada's population. And you can just imagine what that will do in positive terms to enhance the Canadian GDP. So it's a major step forward. It involves an increased investment, adding up to about $2.6 billion over the next 4 or 5 years in First Nations K-12 education. That will start in the first year of our government at about $515 million per year in core annual funding for First Nations K-12, and then that will rise to $750 million per year by the end of our first mandate. Secondly, there's another $500 million over the next 3 years for First Nations education infrastructure, building and maintaining and improving and upgrading the physical facilities. And then finally, $50 million in additional annual support for the post-secondary student support program, which has in the past been capped, and that has limited the access of qualified Indigenous students who want to attend post-secondary education. So we're filling in the gaps with respect to K-12. We're removing the cap with respect to post-secondary. We're going to be building new physical facilities and improving existing facilities. We're also going to be working very closely with First Nations and Métis and Inuit people on how to preserve and enhance Indigenous languages and culture. And we're going to work collaboratively to try to include Aboriginal and treaty rights and the history of residential schools and the important contributions of Indigenous people to Canada in classroom learning across this country everywhere. It's a major step forward, and it has been very well received.
Mr. Goodale, I've noticed a lot of campaign ads with Mr. Trudeau basically saying that he is more than willing to work with Aboriginal people. Is that the point he's trying to get across right now?
Absolutely. The current government's approach is entirely arbitrary. It's top-down. It's Mr. Harper's way or the highway. And his approach shows no understanding of or respect for First Nations leaders or Indigenous people generally. And that approach is doomed to failure. The approach Mr. Trudeau is proposing is collaborative. It's based on partnership. It's based on respect and mutual understanding. The key principle being First Nations control over First Nations education, and the federal government working in close partnership to achieve that objective. So it's a very constructive approach. When you look back at the history of the relationship, between the government of Canada and Indigenous peoples. Well, there's a lot of blame to go around. There's been huge neglect and failure after failure after failure over many, many years and over many, many governments. The template on how to truly make progress was really established by Prime Minister Paul Martin when he worked on the Kelowna Accord in 2004 and 2005. They picked 5 big topics: health, education, housing and water, economic development, and governance. It was fully funded within the budgetary framework of the Government of Canada. It was a completely unanimous agreement involving more than 30 departments and agencies of the federal government, plus every province, plus every territory, plus the 5 national Aboriginal organizations. And it was a template for how you respectfully get to the point where you can make progress. It was over 18 months of careful negotiation by Mr. Martin personally, by his Aboriginal Affairs Minister, by various other players in the federal government. We need to rekindle that spirit and rekindle that work and that approach to making progress. In the meantime, while we work on reestablishing the goodwill and the process around Kelowna, Mr. Harper, of course, threw it all away, and no meaningful progress has been made since that time, 10 years ago. We need to get started on some critical areas. One is that inquiry that is absolutely essential about missing and murdered Indigenous women. And secondly, this package of proposals with respect to education. And it is based upon partnership, mutual respect, and working together on something that is excellent social policy and excellent economic policy at the same time.
Mr. Goodale, you have First Nation listeners right across Alberta listening right now. How important is it on Monday, October 19th to get out and vote?
It's absolutely fundamental. In ridings across northern Alberta, northern Saskatchewan, northern Manitoba, in many other ridings across the country, I think as many as 40 or 50 altogether, the votes of Indigenous people can be hugely influential. And it is really important if we are going to turn the corner on issues like the inquiry, on issues like education, and other issues about housing and water and all of the other things that need to be done. If we're going to turn the corner and make progress, we need the essential engagement of First Nations, Métis, Inuit. The future is at stake here. There is great potential to achieve progress, but it will take the active engagement of Indigenous people at the ballot box, and then equally important in the partnerships that need to be built after we are able to achieve not just a different government, but a fundamentally better government for the future of all Canadians.
The Honourable Ralph Goodale, MP for Wascana, Saskatchewan, and current Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party of Canada. Appreciate you joining us this afternoon, Ralph.
Glad to do it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Now, of course, we reached out to other leaders within the parties of the Conservatives as well, the NDP. If you're willing to come on the air with us, you can give me a call at 780-455-2700. You can also email me, Jeremy, at cfweradio.ca.